Let me begin by telling you that I live in a land steeped in myth and legend, a place where the tale of the vampire was born, and where ghosts are known to sit at the table with the living over the years. I've heard all sorts of stories, each more terrifying than the last. Tonight, I will share with you one of my favorites, a tale passed down to me by an old woman from a mountain village. Let's call her Mara. During the Second World War. Cities were under siege, people were starving, bombs rained from the sky, and daily life became a perilous ordeal. In hopes of escaping the chaos, many fled to the countryside, seeking refuge in the small, remote villages nestled at the feet of towering mountains. That Mara's family was no different. When she was just 17, they left their city home behind, seeking safety in a quiet village far from the war's horrors. Adapting was not easy. Life in the city was vastly different from the hard work and simple existence of the countryside. Yet, with no other choice, they learned quickly, merging into the rhythm of the village. They worked the fields, tended animals, and found solace in the company of their new neighbors soon enough. They made friends, proving themselves as hardworking, kind people. And gradually, their new life in the village became a welcome norm on evening. Mara and her parents visited the neighbors for a small gathering, a common occurrence that offered moments of warmth and distraction from the war-torn world they had left behind. That night, Doru, their neighbor, began to tell a strange and eerie tale from his childhood. A story that would stay with Mara long after the evening had ended. Doru spoke of a man who lived just a few houses down from him. One night, this man heard someone calling his name from outside his window. Thinking it was merely a dream, he dismissed it and went back to sleep. But the next night, at precisely 2 a.m., the voice returned, louder and more insistent. Frustrated and half awake, the man threw open the window and shouted, "Who's out there? What do you want from me at this hour?" That's when he saw it. Gleaming eyes hovering over the fence, staring at him from the darkness. The eyes were unnaturally high, at least 2 meters above the ground. Terrified, he slammed the window shut and rushed to wake his wife. He shook her, trying to call her name, but no sound escaped his lips. He had lost his voice. His wife woke up in a panic, asking what was wrong, but he couldn't hear her either. He had lost his hearing too. From that night onward, the man lived in silence, unable to speak or hear. He would later tell anyone willing to listen about that fateful night and warn them all. Never answer if someone calls your name from the dark. As Doru finished his story, the adults in the room chuckled, dismissing it as a superstition. But Mara noticed something, a tremor in Doru's voice, a nervousness that didn't match the laughter of the others. Curiosity gnawed at her. She asked Doru what had happened to the man, if he was still living in the village or if he had moved away. Doru shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "I haven't seen him in years. Another family lives in his house now." It was late, and the guests began to leave. As they walked home through the quiet village, Mara couldn't shake the unease Doru's tale had left behind. The image of the man's haunted eyes and Doru's anxious hands stayed with her. She barely slept that night, tossing and turning until the first light of dawn crept through her window dot. The moment the sun's rays touched her room, Mara leapt out of bed, dressed quickly, and, without waking her parents, slipped out of the house. She was headed to the cemetery, determined to find out more about the man in the story. If he was dead, his grave would reveal the truth. If not, he might have simply moved away. Or maybe, just maybe, the entire tale was a fabrication. Lost in thought, Mara suddenly found herself standing among the graves, unsure how she had arrived so swiftly. She began searching, carefully examining each grave, reading every inscription, scanning each portrait for the face of the man from Doru's tale. The cemetery was vast, but she was determined to search every corner. No matter how long it took, by the time she reached the 6th row of graves, her eyes caught sight of a figure in the distance, a man standing alone among the headstones. Thinking it might be the caretaker, Mara hurried towards him, eager to ask if he knew the man she was looking for. But as she got closer, she stopped to catch her breath and froze. The man standing before her was none other than Doru. He looked at her, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "You couldn't resist, could you?" he said softly. Mara, startled, asked, "What do you mean? How do you know why I'm here?" Doru sighed and sat down on a nearby bench. "You're looking for the man from my story, aren't you?" He gestured toward the grave in front of him. Mara's eyes fell on the headstone, and there, beneath the photo of an old man, was an unusual inscription. "We will never forget you, and we will never let the darkness enter our home." Shocked, she looked back at Doru. He began to speak, his voice low and filled with sorrow. "Yes, Mara. The man in the story was my father. What I told you happened when I was just a boy. My mother had been sleeping in my room that night because I'd been having nightmares for several nights in a row. I couldn't sleep, though, so I snuck out of bed and went to sit on the porch. I was just a curious 10-year-old staring up at the stars when suddenly the air grew cold and a thick fog descended over the village. shivered, and then I heard it, my mother screaming for my father. I ran inside and saw everything I described to you last night. From that moment on, people started avoiding our family, whispering that my father had lost his mind and was spreading fear with his stories. He passed away 10 years ago. Now I'm the only one who still visits his grave. Mara, her voice barely a whisper, asked, "So it's true?" The voice that called out to him. It wasn't just his imagination. Doru looked up at the sky, tears welling in his eyes. No, Mara. It wasn't his imagination. I heard it too. And I've heard it every night since my father died.